Well, we're going to, as Zach said, be in Mark chapter 8. I want to give you time to find your way to it. I want to ask this question. Have you ever been dehumanized? Have you ever been dehumanized? Where you realize that the person you're interacting with does not see you as a human with thoughts and feelings, with dreams, with hopes, with defeats, with victories. They just see you as an order taker. You're just to them someone that's taking the order and they want you to get the order right. You're a cog in the machine of their day. You're not a person. You're just the guy that changes the oil in the car. You're just a pretty face. There's no person in there. It's just a pretty face or a handsome face. You're just a part of a machine and they need you to function. A lot of times if you go into certain government offices, you feel like, man, do they not see? I need something here, and I feel like I'm just caught in a vast machine. I say that as someone, my mom worked for the government all of my childhood, so please, if you work for the government, don't take offense to that. It was an experience I had with the process of adoption. I was like, golly, I need you to see me as a person who's trying to get something done here. I'm a person that's trying to work my way through the day, and it feels rotten to be dehumanized, doesn't it? It feels terrible, like you're just not that important. Well, Jesus is the human face of God. Jesus is the manifestation of the invisible God. He puts a face on who God is. In a sense, if you want to know the heart of God, what He cares about, what He feels, you can just look at Jesus interacting with people and you will see the human face of God on the face of Jesus Christ, and it shines with glory. It'd be such a tragedy to treat Him as someone who just gets you to heaven, wouldn't it? Right? There's something more. And what I want you to do through this series, what I want you to hear is I want you to hear two things. The first is about prayer. That when we talk to Him, true prayer, not just the repeating of phrases, but when we engage in conversation with our Heavenly Father, we grow. We're changed. We're shaped invisibly by that interaction. Something happens in prayer that it's very mysterious, but God is at work as you're talking to Him, twisting dials inside your soul, shining bright light on your inner person, and it's changing you. It's shaping His heart in you. It's conforming you. Makes you grow in grace. Well, guess what? That's why we're studying prayer and miracles. Today we're looking at a miracle, the feeding of the 4,000. Why would we combine prayer and miracles? It does sound fantastically charismatic. I understand that. But hear me out. These interactions, these personal interactions between Jesus and the lost people of the first century living there in Israel, this also does the same thing. We watch these interactions. We almost instinctively lean forward to get a better look and to listen and to talk to God about what we saw, because you'll not only see these people, you'll see yourself. You'll grow in grace. Seeing these miracles will make you want to talk to God about your life. And so I want you to just listen, and I'm going to encourage you, do what you can to use your imagination this morning. If you don't find yourself far away using your mind's eye to see some of these interactions, you're going to miss some pretty important things. And though we only read 14 to 21, we actually are going to be looking at 1 to 21. So I hope Brendan hadn't gone back there and just erased a bunch of it. So if you did, put it back. All right, listen to this. Verse 1, it says, "In those days, when a great crowd had gathered, and they had nothing to eat, Jesus called His disciples to Himself and said to them, I have compassion on the crowd. They've been with me now 3 days and have nothing to eat. And if I send them away hungry to their homes, they will faint on the way. And some of them have come from far away. And His disciples answered, How can one feed these people with bread here in this desolate place? And he asked them, "How many loaves do you have?" They said, 7. And he directed the crowd to sit down on the ground. And he took and broke them, and he gave them to his disciples and set them before the people. And they set them before the crowd, and they had a few small fish. And having blessed them, he said that these also should be set before them. And they all ate and were satisfied, and they took up broken pieces left over, 7 baskets full. And there were 4,000 people. And he sent them away. Let's stop for just a moment. I want you to know that this is actually a part 2 of feeding the multitudes. So in chapter 6 of Mark, maybe weeks or months before, they'd seen something very, very similar. Jesus involves the disciples in the ministry. He doesn't let them always sit and watch. He's like, hey, I feel compassion for this crowd. I feel for them. They're not just a sea of humanity. They're individuals whose names I actually know. I knew them before they were born. I knit them together in their mother's womb. They matter to me, and I have compassion for them. I want to feed them. And what do the disciples do? Here's what they do, and we kind of fall into this camp every now and then, or pretty often too. They look at the size of the problem, they study the complexity of it, and then they look back at what little they have and they declare defeat. It's not possible. I mean, we don't have anything near enough to answer the need of such a vast crowd. Now, if this had happened in chapter 6, you'd understand the disciples going, well, we just didn't know that was coming. We couldn't have seen that coming. But here in chapter 8, there should have been something of a light bulb moment where someone said, hey, wait a minute, you did this once before. And rather than us just sitting around fretting, rather than us just sitting around studying the size of the problem, the complexity of the problem, would you take the little bitty stuff that we can scrape together, would you take that and somehow, because of who you are, because you not only have compassion, but you also have power. This is who you are. Compassion and power. Would you take the little that we've got and would you just do the miracle? Well, in this case, they just clean missed it. They just didn't see it. Nobody said, hey, we've seen this before. I'll bet you'll do it again. And so Jesus doesn't scold them. Jesus patiently says, what do you have? Well, we've got some loaves. Well, bring them to me. And have the people sit down. Now listen, here is so much of ministry. I could even say it like this. Here's so much of the Christian life. I was about to say, because every time I've trained an elder to be an elder, a deacon to be a deacon, I've started here in this passage and said, you're going to feel often like this. That God is involving you somehow, not to just be a person who's going to heaven someday, and so you got your golden ticket, you're going, but He's going to engage you in ministry life. He's going to ask you to use the gifts that you have to serve Him amongst a group of people, and you're going to look in that moment and say, but what I have is so insufficient. I don't feel like what I have, what I've scraped together, is worth any value to set in front of people. It feels like what I've got is just not enough. And you know what Jesus will say? He'll say exactly what He said to them. Give me what you've got. Scrape together what you've got and hand it to me. And then walk forward in obedience. Your biggest problem will be picking up the leftovers of what God did. Just take what you've got. Give it to Him. Ask Him to do the miracle and walk forward in obedience. Now this is good advice. Some of you, you've got an unfixable marriage. Okay? Some of you have an injury, a sickness, and it is unhealable. Some of you have a debt you can't pay. You're overwhelmed. You've got a job situation. You can't do anything in the world to fix it. Okay, what can you do? take what you can do, put it in front of the Lord and say, Lord, would you do the miracle? Would you fix this broken relationship? Would you pay this debt? Would you heal my body? I'm going to do what I know to do, but I'm going to do it not as a scrambling, frightened, inept person. I'm going to do this in front of you. I'll set what scraps I have in front of you, and I will ask you to do what only God can do. And listen, God is compassionate. God is generous. God is wise. And He's good. And He will take what you give Him and He'll amaze you with it. If you walk forward trusting Him, you'll find over and over again, He is faithful. Well, happy Father's Day, Jamie. You about ready to go? No, there's actually more, right? It's not quite time. There's something else that has to be looked at here. There's this statement that happens that He sent them away, and immediately they got into a boat He went with His disciples to the district of Dalmanutha, and He's encountering this group of Pharisees. Verse 11, the Pharisees came and began to argue with Jesus, seeking from Him a sign from heaven to test Him. And He sighed deeply in His spirit and said, "Why does this generation seek a sign? Truly I say to you, no sign will be given to this generation." He left them and He got into the boat again, went to the other side. Now the Pharisees, who are they? Well, they are the religious ruling class of that generation. They are the religious elite. They are the theologians par excellence. These guys, if anybody would be able to identify the Messiah, it's these guys. Because they're religious experts. They, with the scribes, know more about the law of God than anybody. And so for them to say, we want a sign, you could almost say something like this: you of all people should be the last ones looking for a sign when you already know the Scriptures and what it points to when it comes to the Messiah. How could you? I mean, maybe somebody who wasn't educated could ask for that, but not you. You're the religious leaders. And so these Pharisees bring out a sigh in Jesus. Oh, why are you looking for a sign? Would you not just look at the truth that you already have seen and make your judgment based on it? And so that little interaction happens before verse 14, where we come to a pinnacle of this teaching time. And I want you to hear this. And I want you to try to place yourself in the middle of the disciples as I read this. Now they had forgotten to bring bread, and they had only one loaf with them in the boat. And He cautioned them, saying, "Watch out. Beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and the leaven of Herod." And they began discussing with one another the fact that they had no bread. Well, let's just stop for a moment, okay? They just had this encounter with the religious who ought to know, but didn't. And Jesus, as they get into the boat, we're told by Mark, they only had one loaf of bread. Let's connect a few dots here. If you're sitting in the boat, right? You're not sitting here anymore. You're in that boat. You have just seen the feeding of a multitude. A second time. You've seen it. What did you see when you saw that multitude getting fed? Well, here's what you saw. You saw a little tiny sack lunch being given over to Jesus and being multiplied beyond any reasonable explanation. You saw that Jesus said the reason He did it is because He had compassion on these people. And not only compassion, He had power to help them. And so you saw that with your own eyes. Though you didn't really get to see the miracle, you just kept going back to Jesus and you had another plateful and you walked out and you gave it. And as soon as you gave it, you went back to Jesus and got more. And that's the whole Christian life. I give away what He's given me, and then I come back to Him, Lord, give me more, and I just keep giving it away. And suddenly you find that, wow, He really did something amazing. And so when you get into the boat, and you got one loaf of bread, and Jesus says, I want you to put a red blinking light around something in your life. Here's what it is. The leaven of the Pharisees, the leaven of Herod. Now, if any of you are bakers, you know exactly what that leaven is. It's yeast, right? It is that little bit of yeast that when you put this little almost invisible thing into a lump of dough, in short order, that small, tiny bit of yeast or leaven will impact the entire loaf. It starts small, but you give it time, not even that much time, and it'll impact everything. And so Jesus says to the 12 in the boat with one loaf of bread, you need to be careful about something that is very small right now, but it will grow. Be careful, watch out. This little invisible, almost impossible thing that could make any difference, it's actually going to have a big difference. And here's what the leaven of the Pharisees is. They know the law of God, but they don't know the heart of God. They know the rules, but they don't know the heart. You could even say it like this. They understand religion. The do's, the don'ts. They just don't know the why behind any of that. They don't know the person behind the law. So they've got everything pretty well lined up about the do's and don'ts of a given week, but they don't have any clue as to the heart of God. And he says, beware of that, guys. Beware of that, Christian. It's small, but it in time will impact your entire life. Watch out for it. And then also the leaven of Herod. Well, what the heck is the leaven of Herod? Well, Herod's the king. Herod is the secular / religious king who has a love for the world that allows him to build great palaces. Because why? Well, because he has to get along with Rome to rule over Israel as a king. And so what is Herod? Herod is really just a worldly guy who's figured out how to be in the world and compromise his faith so that he can get along, so that he can go along. His leaven works like this. I will compromise whenever I have to on my faith so that I can have what I want. It's a worldliness. It's any time I have to tuck away my faith in God so that I can get what I want, I'll do that. So in some ways, it's on the opposite end of the Pharisees. You got Herod, who's a worldly guy who has enough religion to sound religious, but he'll compromise anytime. You've got the Pharisees over here who are rigid about the law, but they have no idea why. And he says, guess what? You need to watch out, you 12 men, because this little thing that you see there, that could be impacting your entire life. And so, how do they respond when he says, beware of this? It says, and they began discussing the fact that they had no bread. You see that? Their response to his warning? Yeah, I mean, cool, Jesus, I'm with you. I mean, all this thing about leaven and theology, and we don't have any bread. I mean, let's be honest. We got a here and now problem in the boat. And you're talking about yeast and like Pharisees and Herod, and look, man, that's all good. I mean, we're great with that. I mean, tell us all about it. But here's the problem: we don't have any bread. So it's a here and now thing. It's not a next week thing. We're hungry and we don't have any bread. In the boat right now, we don't need theology. We need bread. You know, I mean, it sounds like this. You are always worthy. With me in my weeping, you are good. That sings good on Sunday morning. What about Tuesday when something breaks? You got a here and now problem that feels very, very, very detached from Sunday morning worship. Right? And so what does Jesus do with this group? What would you do? If you were one of the 12 in that moment and you saw that you have one loaf and you got 13 others, right? Jesus plus the others. You got all these guys, and everybody's hungry, right? So it's 12 others plus you, and right? You got this longing for food and it's a here and now problem. Jesus is going on about this and that. Would anybody say, hang on, wait, just let me carry the 0 and move the 1. I think we're okay. And here's why I think we're okay. He cared about that crowd. And they didn't have much either to start with. But when they did take what they had and give it to him, he was more than enough. Would you like to be the guy, the gal who stood up and go, guys, call me crazy, but in light of what we know and what we've seen, maybe we shouldn't be arguing right now. Maybe we should just call a timeout and say, we didn't bring enough. And this here and now problem, I think, doesn't just matter to us. Maybe it matters to you. Maybe because you have compassion and power, we don't need to be bickering with each other right now about how to get mine. Because we got you, and we can take what we have, we could put it in front of you, and somehow just ask you, would you do that thing again? Would you do it again? Listen to what Jesus does in response to their neglect of his warning. Listen to how he answers. It says, and Jesus, aware of this, said to them in verse 17, why are you discussing the fact that you have no bread? That's a rhetorical question, but try to find the answer. Right? You know what Jesus does in this little section? He asks them 8 questions. 8 questions. Jesus often used questions to peel the onion back, to get at the core. These questions will dive right to the core of something. And at the very middle of those questions is this: do you have a hardened heart? All these questions, in a sense, they go up a mountain, and at the center of it, it leads to this question: do you have a hardened heart? Listen to the questions. Why are you discussing the fact that you have no bread? Do you not yet perceive or understand? Are your hearts hardened? Are having eyes, do you not see? Having ears, do you not hear? Do you not remember? When I broke the 5 loaves for the 5,000, how many baskets full of broken pieces did you take up? And they said to him, 12. And the 7 for the 4,000, how many baskets full of broken pieces did you take up? And they said to him, 7. And he said to them, do you not yet understand? I wonder if I'd been there that day. I wonder if you'd been there that day. If we would have done any different. I wonder if we would have said, you know something, we're going to be okay. Because if he has compassion for crowds, if he heals the blind, if he forgives people caught in sin, if he can be who I think he is, we don't have to argue with each other and fight over who's going to get one bite of bread. Why didn't they come to him? You know how I said a minute ago that the Pharisees of all people should have been able to see him? You agree with that, right? Like, if you're a religious leader in the Old Testament law, you should have been the first person to go, you are the Messiah. I can see it. You know who should have been the first person to say, we don't need to worry about bread? It's the disciples, right? They'd seen so much. How could they argue about bread? It's almost as if someone wanted to say, that in this boat we had somebody who cared about us, who could help us when we don't have much. Oh, that there was somebody who would actually be on our side and we weren't just on our own. And there sits Jesus. Right? So they should have got it. So why didn't they? Why didn't they come to the Lord and ask for help? Because they had hardened hearts. They had hardened hearts. I put together some of the reasons why I think they didn't do this. Just a handful of thoughts. And I want to see if you think that today as you sit here and you worship the Lord, and it's good and it's right and it's fun and it's engaging and it's all of that, and then come Wednesday or Thursday morning and you find yourself outmatched and you find yourself alone and you find yourself disoriented and confused, will you go to Him and ask Him for grace and mercy and help, or will you study the complexity of your problem, the size of your problem, and sit and lament? I want you to turn to Him. Listen to the reasons I think they didn't. I think mainly they didn't turn to Him, or at least part of the reason is because they didn't think He cared. I mean, this is a here and now problem of our own making. We forgot the bread. Didn't know that you sitting here meant that I could be okay. Didn't know that your presence, your proximity, your care and compassion for my life meant that you care about lunch. I thought that I had to do that. I thought lunch was on me. I thought you were somewhere out there ruling the universe or something. I just didn't know you cared about my life. I didn't know you cared about the things like this. I thought you cared about like big, huge things. I just didn't know you cared about little things like me eating lunch. When I was in Ghana, the first trip that I took, 10 years before I went for the sake of adoption, I was struggling with the food, we'll say. I just struggled to eat it. It was foreign to me. It was very different to me. And at first I just didn't like it. And I remember we went to this remote village called Tutu Penny. And we went there and we brought medicine to this village and to the little clinic that really didn't have much. And man, the village, they were so beautiful, so wonderful, these people. And man, they put on a feast for us. It was glorious. And I remember thinking, I'm going to struggle to eat that. And I did my best because I wanted to honor the people who had honored us so much. And as we were driving back, and it was a long ways back, I remember we stopped late in the day, and they handed us each, at this little place, they handed us a styrofoam box and said, "This is your dinner." And I thought, oh gosh, I'm not, Lord, I don't know, I'm going to struggle with this. And I opened it up, and it was French fries and like little buffalo wing, like little drumsticks. And I nearly started crying. I thought, oh gosh, praise God, like this is good. And I was like, man, thanks. And I feel like God said, stop. Hear this, Robert. I oversaw the life of those potatoes. I oversaw the watering in the air and the soil of these potatoes and this little chicken wings. I oversaw their life and the preparation of that so that you could have this one meal today. So before you just say thanks and dig in, I want you to know I cared about what you were eating today. I care about your meal. So thank me, and not in a mean way, but I'm not just somebody who plops stuff in front of you. I'm actually a father who cares. Enjoy. To do less than that would almost be to dehumanize him. You're just a meal giver. No, I'm a father who watches and sees and provides. Why did they not turn to him? They didn't think he cared. They didn't think he cared. We make this mistake. We start thinking, well, he cares about the great big things like the orbit of the planets and the rise and fall of nations, but I can't necessarily come to him with my petty little things like I just don't feel like I could eat that, or I long for something that is happening in my life to go better. Would you help me? They didn't turn because they didn't think he cared. And let me tell you something. When you think God's heart is hard towards you, your heart will get hard towards him. When you think he doesn't care about you, you'll stop caring what he thinks about you. You'll start to think that if his heart is that distant and hard from me, then my heart is going to grow hard towards him. Well, that's one reason. You know why else they didn't turn to him? And this is really true. They were so used to self-reliance. If they had a problem, they solved it. If they encountered something like that, they said, well, I can fix this. I can deal with this. It wasn't their habit to turn to him. Their habit was to just look at what they've got and decide what they could do with it. I wonder how often in a day you turn to him and say, I need you. I mean, I could try to solve this on my own. I could try to fix this on my own. I need you. I need you to lift the other side of that heavy object for me. I need you. I had to change an alternator out on my daughter's car the other day. And I watched YouTube videos, but I just prayed and said, hey, will you help me with this? I mean, I'm going to get in over my pay grade pretty quick here. So would you help me? I mean, just how quickly do you rely on you rather than rely on him? I think it would be good to start leaning, even in the middle of an argument with your spouse. Father, I don't want to say something that makes this worse. Would you help me? I don't know what to do with strong personalities that are coming at me. Would you help me say the right words, be silent when I should be silent? Would you help me? Would you just give me the strength and the wisdom to know how to negotiate this? Because it's over my pay grade. Would you help me? They didn't turn to him because they got used to relying on themselves. I think the other piece of this too is that they realized that they're the ones that forgot the bread. They deserve this. Why? I mean, come on. This was our mistake. Why are we going to involve God incarnate here? Why would we do that? Well, we made the mistake. Friends, nobody gets to come to him and exchange coins for service. You get that, right? Like everybody comes empty-handed. Nobody gets to say, you owe me. Everybody gets to come to him and say, I made a mess. I need your help. This is a mess of my making, and I need your help. So if you're waiting to when you feel like you've sufficiently had enough quiet times and shared the gospel and read the Bible enough, and then you'll confidently go to him and say, hey, by the way, I need some help. And I kind of earned it. I've earned it. Let's be honest. I was pretty godly back then. You see me being unselfish. You see me sharing the gospel. You see me reading my Bible. You know, come on, help me. No, nobody gets to come to him like that. Nobody. Nobody. You know, but I think the main thing for why they didn't come to him, if I had to boil it down to this, why their hearts gotten hard, they forgot how good and kind and powerful he is. He asked them several times, did you forget? Have you forgotten? There is a tendency in our Christian life to forget the faithfulness of God. I mean, when you recount the story in the chapters of your life, and you recount the faithful, good, kind hand of God at work in your life, it'll just lift you up. You'll be like, oh yeah, I totally forgot about that. We weathered a really, really hard storm that time, and God just worked everything out. As you sit here today, and you face something that is just overwhelming to you, remember his faithfulness. Remember that he saw you through lots of hard storms, and he was good, and he was kind, and he was generous. There are a couple of verses that have really spoken to me over the years. 1 Peter chapter 5, verses 6 and 7. Listen to this. Humble yourselves, therefore, under the mighty hand of God, so that at the proper time, because he's using the waiting for a purpose, so at the proper time he may exalt you. The waiting is necessary. So humble yourself under these circumstances as you wait and look to him. At the proper time, he will exalt you. Cast your anxieties on him. Why? He cares for you. And that's an active tense verb, friends. That means he is actively at all times shepherding you. He is the God who sees. Jehovah El Roi. He looks and he watches and he sees and he's shepherding you from a great proximity and from a great distance. He is seeing everything and he cares actively for you. And if you believe that, your heart will not get hard. If you don't believe that God cares for you, you'll perpetually live your life like you're one of 13 people in a boat full of hungry people and you've got to get yours. And you're going to argue with them. You're going to argue. You're going to always feel like, well, nobody cares about me. I got to get mine. And I'm sorry if that means you don't get yours, but I got to take care of number one because no one else is. You will let that little tiny leaven of worldliness start to grow and grow and grow. And pretty soon you're going to look up and it's going to infect everything you look at. God doesn't care about me. There's evidence. And listen, the enemy of your soul wants you to believe this. And so here's what you'll start to do. You'll start to accuse God of not caring about you. And you'll find evidence. You'll look at hard things you went through and say, well, he didn't care then. He didn't care then. You know what God would say? Let's rewrite that script a little bit. You breathe in and out every day. You know right from wrong every day. You have the opportunity to talk to me and find grace for this moment. And I've been doing that your entire life. God cares for you. He cares for me. And if we believe that, we'll turn to Him in our moment. We'll look for Him. And here's an even greater one. Romans chapter 8, verse 32 through 35. Listen to this. He who did not spare His own Son. So He's not stingy. But He gave Him up for us all. How will He not also with Him graciously give us all things? You think He's going to offer heaven's best, eternity's best, the Son of God? Do you think He's going to offer that for you and then suddenly get all miserly and stingy like, I'm not going to help you with your lunch. I'm not going to help you with your discouragement. I'm not going to help you with the future things that are scaring you. I don't care. Of course He cares. He gave His Son. Who shall bring any charge against God's elect? Let them try. Let them say, you're guilty of this, you're guilty of that. And God say, yeah, and my Son paid for that debt. It is God who justifies. Now that's an important word. Do you know justify is a legal term? It's a legal term. It's when the judge drops the gavel and says, I declare you righteous. Now it'd be one thing if the judge dropped the hammer and said, not guilty. Not guilty's good. Righteous? The judge drops the gavel and says, not only not guilty, I declare you righteous. Whew. It is God who justifies. Who is to condemn? Christ Jesus is the one who died. He was condemned for us. More than that, who was raised, who is at the right hand of God, who indeed is interceding for us right now, pleading with the Father for our sake. You matter to God. Your now matters. And it doesn't matter if it's as big as cancer or as small as dinner. You matter to Him. There's a story in Brennan Manning's book, Abba's Child, which I totally recommend that you read that book. It wreaked havoc on me for a third time reading it. There's a story of a man who is born and raised Catholic. He's trying to figure out what prayer is. He's always struggled with prayer. He's never liked prayer. He even told the priest at one point, I get nothing from your homilies on prayer. The priest handed him a book and said, this Swiss theologian is the greatest voice on prayer in the 18th and 19th centuries. You should read this. And he said, I tried and I read this book and I had to look up 3 words on the first chapter and I'm like, forget it, I'm done. He said that when he finally told another priest this, the priest said, okay, here's what you need to do. Sit in your living room and put an empty chair in front of you and visualize Jesus sitting in that chair and just talk to Him. Just talk to Him as if He's sitting in that chair. And he said, I got to tell you, as he was dying of cancer in the hospital, the friend that had said this said, did you start talking to Jesus? He said, I sure did. I do it every day for a couple of hours a day. I don't even tell my daughter this because she'd take me to the funny farm if she saw me talking to an empty chair, but I talk to Him every day. I sit and have a real conversation with Him. And so that friend who had helped him learn to pray came back a week later because he'd heard that the man had died. And when he got there, he saw the daughter and he said, I'm so sorry your dad died. Can you tell me what happened the day that he died? And she said, well, it was really strange. He seemed fine that morning. I went there, I saw him, he told me a corny dad joke, and then he kissed me on the cheek, and I said, I'll be back in an hour with some groceries. And when I came back, he was dead. He said, really? She said, there was something really strange, though. I found him laying in his bed, but he leaned over and he had his head on the chair next to the bed. He died, putting his head where he believed his Savior to be. Now, friends, don't live your Christian life alone. Talk to him. Share with him. Ask him for grace. Ask him for wisdom. Ask him for affirmation. Ask him to tell you who you are. Don't get a hard heart because you refuse to turn to him. You've forgotten all that he's done. You've forgotten his compassion, his power, his track record of faithfulness. Don't get a hardened heart because you have learned to compromise like Herod, or you've learned the rules like the Pharisees. Talk to him. He's listening and he loves you. Let's pray.